but it is somewhat limiting because Malachim is a very specific take on what's important in the history of the First Temple period. More specifically, Malachim divides history according to kings. History doesn't work according to kings. Malachim divides history, focuses on history as an issue of religious evaluation, focused solely on whether the king centralizes worship or not. That's not the only issue that happens. So Malachim is a fragment of history. One needs to go beyond that, and they do try to do that in this curriculum, and then show from the history why I focus on the message of the Navi and how that's relevant to the student's life, and you'll see that in a few minutes when I hit Perek Vav. The curriculum is structured in a very specific way. So the textual aims at the beginning of the semester are much simpler than the textual aims at the end of the semester. It moves from basic translation to division based on Te'amim, moving from there to identifying and understanding parallelism. So there's a graduated progress through the semester, through the year. It doesn't focus on Midrash, as you can see, and it does not follow the order of chapters in Yeshayahu. I do not begin with Perek Aleph and go to Perek Samach Vav. Rather, I recognize that Yeshayahu is an edited book, and it has essentially 5 or 6 subunits. It's worth spending a moment showing you how I think the book is structured, and then I'll go into how I proceed through it. First of all, chapters 1 to 5, the first 5 Prakim, are an overview of themes in the Navi. They are ahistorical. They are intentionally ahistorical. They deal with key ideas in the Nevuot. If you start in Perek Vav, you get 6 whole chapters of chapter by chapter history. I'm happy to forward this post this PowerPoint down. It's chapter by chapter history. And I really think that the general curriculum of focusing on these 12 Prakim is a good way of beginning Sefer Yeshayahu, but I don't think you should begin with chapter 1, I think you should begin with chapter 6. And I do that, and you'll see how I do that. 13 to 35, I don't focus on in this curriculum. There's a lot of valuable material there, which you can bring in, but I don't focus on that in this curriculum. 36 to 39 are the narratives, which have to be brought in, and they come after 6 to 12. And then we get the second Isaiah material, or Shivat Zion material. This is the historical order, and the curriculum follows the historical order. On the first page of the handout that you get the outline. This outline more or less. All right. The model lesson I'm going to give now is going to be on Perek Vav. My goals in teaching Perek Vav are as follows. I would like the student to begin by unpacking. It's a 3-part lesson plan. There's 3 different sections here. I'd like the student to begin by unpacking the Nivuah. I'd like him to begin and just read the first 6 verses and get the idea of transcendence, of the difference of God between God and other human kings, and how the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh works. And to do that, I use the worksheet that you have on the first page of the worksheet handout. I ask the students here just to break up the Nivuah, look at the material, identify the individual elements, and recognize that it's happening both in the Beit HaMikdash and in heaven at the same time. It's happening in the past and in the present at the same time. It's happening in the future at the same time. And from that idea that God is not in a single place nor in a single time period, the student understands what Kedusha means. Because you can't just tell the student, Kedusha is transcendence. It doesn't work. You have to explain what transcendence means. The Nevuah explains what transcendence means, if you look carefully. The Nevuah gives it to you and tells you that God's operating in lots of different times, transcending time and transcending space. But you have to allow the student to unpack that. And that is the first introduction the student has to the idea of what it means to see God. Va'ereh et Hashem. What is to see God? It's to recognize transcendence. From there, I move the student to, well, what is God sitting on? He's sitting on a throne. So what do you see when you walk into a human throne? A human throne room. And here you have a human throne room. Guess where I come from. This is the Senate in Ottawa. And if you zoom in closely enough, you can see the thrones at the front of the room, the throne for Her Majesty the Queen, for His Royal Highness the Prince Consort, and then behind him for the Speaker of the Senate. So the idea of the throne as the center of attention. And Yeshayahu is, of course, not modeling himself on Parliament of Canada, but he is modeling himself on a throne room. And that's where I move to the second lesson. I don't think I do it here right now. It's in the second lesson that I actually move you to the throne room on which this is based. This is part of the research I've done for the last 5 or 6 years. Yeshayahu is basing himself off the throne room of King Shawn II in Kalach, which is in use during his time period. And actually, these slides are up. British Museum may sue me, but the slides are up. You're welcome to use the material. And any Jewish emissary who brought tribute during the time of Yeshayahu to Assyria, and of course Assyria is the regnant power and dominant power which rules the Near East at this time period. The Judean kings are putty in their hands, has to go through this whole indoctrination process in the Assyrian throne room. And they walk in, and they first see all these, they see reliefs along the walls of people bringing tribute to Assyria. Then they move from there to seeing these winged creatures at the entrances, right, guarding the king who accepts the tribute. Those winged creatures should begin to remind you of something in Yeshayahu Perek Vav. You then look at the main entrance, and of course this should really remind you of something in Yeshayahu Perek Vav, right? The function of these creatures here are called the Apkalu creatures. You see they're holding purification, they're holding something in their hands. They're purifying the entrances to prevent the entrance of evil spirits. And then you walk through a continued, it is very cool. Assyria is very cool. It's worth spending 3 years knocking your head against the wall at Penn, learning Canadian. If you ask Barry Ashford if it was worth his while to teach me or not. In any case, this is the image of the king. This is part of the idea of the king as invincible. The king is supposed to be invincible, and you see the battle. You can zoom in here. You see the battles that the king is fighting, and how the battles show the power of the king, and how everyone is bringing tribute. And these slides are explaining the accompanying lesson plans. Details of the king winning wars, and finally you get to the throne room. And in front of this image is the king's throne. And what is this image here? You have the image of a multi-winged creature standing on the side of the king while the king is issuing obeisance to the god Ashur. How does all this relate to Yeshayahu Perek Vav? Well, Yeshayahu Perek Vav is a contrast off of this image. Whereas this image shows the king as transcendent, as above all, the king as powerful, as winning wars. It also shows the weakness of the king, because the king here is susceptible to evil, to impurity, to illness, and that's why you need these purifiers at the entrances, right? Purifiers are there to protect the palace from the. And we get back to this image here, and you see the idea of the king as susceptible. What in Yeshayahu Perek Vav shows that God is not susceptible to Tumah. What in Yeshayahu Perek Vav shows that God does not need helpers. So go ahead, tell me. What in Yeshayahu Perek Vav argues against the idea of God as able to receive Tumah. Just look at this. Think of the verses.
He's purifying others. Well,
that's right.
The
human being can receive Tumah. Yeshayahu needs to be purified, but God doesn't need to be purified. If you look back at
also he dies.
Right. Yeshayahu is susceptible to death. Again, the human being is susceptible to all these to ephemerality. God is insusceptible. Thank you. Let's go to someone else English. To ephemerality. God is transcendent. Yeshayahu is God. What does kadosh 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 mean? Here you see the king is powerful, but the king is not above and beyond time and space. And Yeshayahu is using Perek Vav to remind his listeners that while human beings are ephemeral, despite their indomitable power, it is only God who is transcendent. And that's sort of the message of Perek Vav. Now, Perek Vav uses a sort of sensory overload. I have the very beginning of the first lesson, I have the students list all the verbs of hearing and the verbs of seeing. There's a lot of vayareh, vayishma, vayareh, vayishma. There's a reason why Yeshayahu is talking about sensory overload here. He's talking about sensory overload because the visitors to the Assyrian palace are themselves subjected to sensory overload. In other words, this visit to the Assyrian palace is not done as an act of kind hospitality. It's done to convince the Judean and other emissaries, and all emissaries are subjected to this, we're only interested in the Judeans. It's done to convince the emissaries that the power of Assyria is eternal and indomitable. And Yeshayahu has to convince the people that he's speaking to that you've gone through sensory overload, but you need to also use cognitive processing. And these are one of the two issues where I really unpack this for the students. Students are living in a world of sensory overload. They're in video, audio, it's constant, the iPod. And what I want the students to do is to take a step back from the world of sensory overload, which the Assyrian king is trying to foist on the Judeans of Isaiah's time, or on which the iPod world is trying to foist on our students, and to take a step back and to think, to do cognitive reprocessing. And so what I ask the student to do is to do a sort of cognitive reprocessing of this scene that they've gone through, and then after they've done the cognitive reprocessing, I ask them to show how Yeshayahu is doing cognitive reprocessing. I think it's a very useful lesson which takes historical material, but I don't really care that the students sort of know the details and know that this is called the palace of Ashurnasirpal and Kala. And I want the students to understand the larger idea of sensory overload, cognitive reprocessing, being overwhelmed with physicality versus thinking about God as transcendent, even though you can't see him, you can't smell him. So those are some of the issues I do in this lesson. The curriculum is a work in progress. There are about, 18, 19 lessons up now, going from Perek, goes from Perek Vav through Yud Bet, and then I have all of Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin up, and Aleph up, Vav to Bet. I welcome comments, complaints, suggestions from teachers on whether this is actually useful to you. I hope it is. I put much of my life into it so far. It's because of this, my book on Yeshayahu is not done. But I also would be glad to hear from you whether this is valuable, or what parts of it are valuable. So
This is great because especially in 9th grade they do by us. They do
learning
Syria,
this.
Babylon, Persia.
Okay,
They know the eagle. They know the reliefs. They're learning about all that and like art history at the same time. So it's amazing to bring all that.
Okay,
in.
so you really have it. So it's very, very valuable to educators. I'm happy to sort of
Yeah, I mean they're also
do
doing
this.
shmos like the midrashim of Moshe getting purified. Where's that midrash taking it from? Like a lot
Right, the
of
Medrash of Moshe. They always think of the Medrash of Moshe. Medrash of Moshe is coming from Yeshayahu. You have to recognize that. So these are some of the pieces that I want them to get. Shall I continue and do the rest of the chapter, or where are we for time?
Why don't we do it at the end if there's more time?
Okay, fine. So does this